Today we are joined with Sarah Sajja. She is a recent Lee alum and she's now on staff here at Lee. We get the privilege to talk to her about culture, her culture, but also culture at Lee. As we have these conversations, we hope that you take away so much, but let's dive in.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation, just to see how we grow together.
Oh, I'm excited. So, Sarah, remind me of the town that your family's from in India.
Yeah, so my family is from Vijayawada, India. It's in the southern region of India.
Nice. And we wanted to ask you, what has your experience been as a diverse student?
Yeah, I genuinely enjoyed my experience at Lee. The 4 years that I was here were very transformational, but you obviously feel the impact when you shift to a different environment. And so I think there were several times where I was sitting in a lecture hall, maybe there are 70 students, and you look around and you're like, man, I'm the only person of color here. Yeah, you know what I mean. But I think I really started to feel that impact when I started to step into leadership opportunities. And don't get me wrong, like those opportunities were really impactful for me. And those are the opportunities that taught me about finding my voice and things like that. But I think there comes a point in time where people keep asking you to do things or you get opportunities and you start to feel like the token student of color. Like, okay, are they just asking me this to be a representation of all of diversity on Lee's campus? So I think I really struggled with that mentality for a while, but I really had to have a shift in mindset and just had to start thinking, okay, I'm doing these things, I'm stepping into these opportunities, but how am I using these opportunities to empower other students of color? So can I use this to remind someone else that they are capable of leading well?
Wow. So how do you embrace your culture when it's not the culture that you're surrounded with?
It's a hard question. And just definitely something that I think is almost a lifelong process. So my family is, like you said, my family's from India, but I was the only one in my family that was born in the States. And so it's always kind of that balance of tension between I'm too Indian to be American, but then I'm too American to be Indian. It's not necessarily a bad tension, but it's just something that's like on the forefront of my mind a lot because I want to take hold of my Indian culture, but also take hold of my American culture. But I don't really think I felt or understood what it meant to embrace culture until I came to Lee, because for the entirety of my life, all of my friends were all Indian or they were international. And so they didn't necessarily question like my behavioral patterns or like the way that I communicated and things like that, because we all grew up in very similar households. But when I came to Lee, there obviously were not as many Indians. Like I had one really good Indian friend, Joyce. But I think people started to like maybe question some of my behavior patterns or like my communication was different from what they were used to. So it starts to make you feel like something's wrong with you, or like I'm like, am I doing something wrong? Is like my behavior weird? But I think embracing culture is a lot about celebrating the uniqueness inside of you and knowing that it's not something to be ashamed of. Like, how boring would it be if everyone was the same?
Right.
But just knowing that we all bring something different to the table, and different is really good most of the time.
So as we talk about differences, what are some things you wish people know about your culture?
Yeah.
So we're gonna get into it.
Man, I would love for people to know that not all Indians are gas station owners.
Yeah.
Not all of us are great at math and science. We're not all engineers and doctors. But there's also a really creative side to us, you know. But I just think on like a more serious note, just knowing that we are people that really value family. Like family is at the center of everything that we do. Indian culture is an honor-shame culture, which is sometimes really hard, but sometimes there is a beauty in that honor, because in my mind when I make a decision, it's like, how is this decision going to impact my family rather than just how is this decision going to impact me? So regardless of whether I agree or disagree with my family on a lot of things, I know that they're going to continue to do life with me and continue to be there for me, no matter where I go. I think another thing is just the open door policy. Like in India, your door is literally like always open. Like there's no like schedule. We're on our own time for sure, but people can come into your house whenever they want. And my parents really taught me to live by that same principle and to live with that same kind of hospitality. It's not about how much you can give, but it's almost like how you make people feel. Like when they come into your home, regardless of how much or how little you have, are you going to make them feel like they belong? And when they leave, are you going to let them leave empty-handed, or are you going to, give them something to take with them? So I think those are just two things. What about you? What would you say for Bahamian culture? What are things that you would want people to know?
I think one of the main things is just like when we think of third world countries, that doesn't mean poverty. Like the Bahamas is thriving. It's a nice place to go. It's a tourist destination, and so just thinking beyond the idea of third world equals poverty. It's beyond that. So
that's great. I also then want to ask, like, if someone has a question about your culture, how should they approach you with those questions and that curiosity?
Yeah, man, I know that I love talking about my culture because it's something that I'm passionate about, and who doesn't love to talk about things that they're passionate about? But I think sometimes it can be hard. It can be hard to ask those questions because people don't want to offend someone else. But I think it just goes back to analyzing your intentions and how are you wording your question? Just simple things like that. Are you asking your question in a way that makes the other person feel like what they're doing is weird? Maybe it's not weird. Maybe it's just different to you. And I think maybe even going back and saying, hey, I don't even know how to ask this question, but I'm genuinely curious about this. It's not a bad place to start. But I think it's better to rather just say, I don't know, than to just assume something about someone. And I think a lot of it is also, you have to be willing to educate yourself. Not everyone is going to want to talk about their culture, and you have to be okay with that. So being willing to do that research on your own, I think, is also really important.
Absolutely.
That's good. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, no, I mean, just approaching people with empathy and realizing like you are going to have to just talk through things, and things, like you said, will be different, but that's okay. We are here to learn from each other, and that's what the Lee experience is honestly about, learning from each other. So yeah.
With that, Sarah, I wanted to ask, how have you used your platform to empower others?
Yeah, man. I think diversity is something that is always on the forefront of my mind, because when I was at Lee, someone created a safe place for me, for diverse students to be incorporated and for them to lead. And so it's been really cool because I get to do that with the job that I have now. And so just simple things of like, okay, we're playing an event in the office. Are there students of color that come to mind that I know can speak to this topic really well or lead really well in this area? Simple things like that. And even just like, I get to meet with any students all over campus, and just meeting with students of color and sitting down and asking them, what has your experience at Lee been like so far? Has Lee made it a place where you feel like you belong, like you feel at home here, and what are things that Lee can do better? But I also think just that representation matters. Like sometimes we don't understand how important just our existence is, and like our existence in a position is empowering to someone else. So I think those are some ways.
That's good.
So just to wrap up, our last question is, what is your hope for culture and diversity at Lee?
Yeah. I think Lee has come really far within this past year. Just the fact that we're sitting down and having this conversation, honestly, right? It started as a small dream, but look at what it has become. And even the opening of the Office of Racial and Ethnic Relations, that was a huge step for Lee. So first, celebrating those things, but also knowing there's a lot of work to be done. But I think when I think about that question, it brings me back to how important a change in the heart is, right? the change in the heart is the hardest work to do. You know, the heart work is always the hardest work. So I think it's important for everyone to first go back and analyze their own hearts and say, what is my, not even my opinion, but what is my attitude to embracing diversity, to embracing culture? And I then think from there, the work moves outward, right? So it starts in an inner place and then it moves outward. And so I would love to see more diversity and more embracing of culture within the faculty and staff. Because, like I said, representation, it matters. And even from there, I think that will draw a lot of students of color to Lee, and that's something we want to see. But even like working with what we have, I think is really important. So I would love just for students of color to know, and then for them to know, but also to take hold of what's in front of them, to stop letting fear like so easily take hold of their hearts, but stepping into the opportunities that are in front of them. Sometimes you have to be the first. Sometimes you have to pioneer the way for other students of color to come behind you.
For sure.
But you'll be the first, but you know you won't be the last. So just knowing that you can leave an impact where you are.
And your voice matters.
Yes,
Your voice
matters, and your story matters. Your story can help change someone else's story in a way that you can't even imagine.
For sure. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited for the work that you guys are doing on campus.
We appreciate you coming and talking with us, and we hope that we can continue to have conversations just like this.
Yes.